Arsenal have escaped their banter era. As much as I hate to say it, that appears to be true for this current Arsenal side. Hopefully this doesn't end up being a curse for Arsenal, but we have to give them credit where it's due, because they managed to turn around the situation at the club in pretty impressive time, especially when compared to United. Again, I hate to say it, but it's definitely true. Losing a legendary manager will hit any club like a bag of bricks, and Arsenal were definitely not an exception. The lead up to Arsene Wenger's departure was definitely a complicated one, as he didn't end up leaving on the best of terms. There's an argument to be had that Arsenal's banter era actually kicked off when Wenger was still in control of the squad. Because of this, the legendary manager ended up splitting the fan base as long as he stayed at the club, with fans constantly calling for his head in his last season.
It's time to go!
By the time that he did leave the club, the footballing world collectively felt that Arsenal's banter era was going to get progressively worse. And yet, here we are 5 years later, and Arsenal are in the midst of a title race with the omnipotent Man City and a Liverpool side that's looking to cap off Klopp's farewell tour with the grand prize. Mind you, this is also following up a season where Arsenal bottled the Premier League, a position that no one thought they would even be in, which goes to show that the level they are performing at is not just some fluke. Arsenal at this point have Bleacher Report making graphics where their ops best player potentially crowning them champions. This is unprecedented motion in the footballing world. In these last 2 seasons, Arsenal have shown that their banter era is no more. Instead, we are now entering the Arteta era. This man, without a shadow of a doubt, has been the biggest catalyst for Arsenal's recent resurgence. And real quick, boys, if you're new to the channel and you enjoy the video, don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe. Weekly video essays, weekly FC24 videos. Leave a like, subscribe, it helps the channel a ton. But let's get back to the video. Before Arteta got to Arsenal, the footballing world had no idea what he was going to be capable of as a manager. But for those who were paying attention to his managerial career to that point, they were already game to what he could bring. Arteta retired from football on May 15th, 2016. He would retire as a player heavily respected by the fan bases of the 2 Premier League clubs that he played with, Everton and Arsenal. Although he spent more time at Everton, Arsenal fans still had a respect for Arteta, as he was an incredibly reliable player, always gave his all, and would captain the club in his final seasons. Following his retirement, Arteta would almost immediately join Manchester City to become Pep Guardiola's assistant manager. A brilliant footballing mind, as the player was now going to be under the tutelage of arguably the best football manager of all time. Arteta already held a good relationship with Pep before joining City. In at least 2 different occasions, Guardiola drew to Arteta as an aid for drawing up tactics for his sides, most notably in Barcelona's 2012 matchup against Chelsea. Here, Guardiola would phone Arteta, and the player left the manager stunned by the level of detail and tactical prowess that he would show. While in Manchester, Arteta would prove to be an important piece of an incredibly efficient machine that City were. Arteta would learn and challenge Pep Guardiola, as the pair had a great relationship which allowed both parties to constantly improve. As the years went on, Arteta's stock only continued to grow, and it seemed like it was only a matter of time before he made the leap into a full-out managerial position. In the 1920 season, Arsenal were going through a tough period, which I'll get into in just a second, that saw them in need of a new manager to steer them back on track. It would become so clear that Arteta was the perfect man for the job. A former Arsenal captain who had just spent the last few years learning and bouncing off of Pep Guardiola is a no-brainer as a candidate. Despite Pep and City's reluctance to let Arteta go, on December 19th, 2019, Arteta would be appointed as the manager of Arsenal. Before we get into Arteta as Arsenal's manager, it's crucial that we backtrack and see how Arsenal's banter era progressed from Wenger's retirement up to that point. After Wenger's final season at the club, Unai Emery took over. As a hate watcher, this period for Arsenal was arguably one of my favorites. Coincidentally, this is also when AFTV was at its peak. For those that don't know what AFTV is, Arsenal Fan TV, channel ran by Arsenal fans, super poppin'. Emery, who at that point was a 3-time Europa League winner, was coming off a hot and cold tenure with French giants PSG. Even though there definitely was promise in the appointment of Emery, not all fans were convinced by him. What also added to this was Emery's inability to win Ligue 1 in his first season at PSG. Despite this, Emery was committed to bringing the London club back to the glory it had seen under the rule of Arsene Wenger. No longer were Arsenal going to be 4th place merchant under the rule of the mighty Emery. Well, one good evening later, and Emery's start to his first campaign went almost as terrible as possible. 2-0 loss to City and a 3-2 loss to Chelsea led to Arsenal fans beginning to question the abilities of the players in the squad. Surprisingly, Emery was cut some slack in his first 2 games because they were against top 6 opposition. And this slack seemingly would pay off, as Arsenal would go on undefeated for a good chunk of games, but that would come to a screeching halt when they would lose to a 19th place Southampton side. From this point, Arsenal would turn out an incredibly inconsistent season that would prove to extend their banter era for at least one more campaign. This season saw results such as a 5-1 loss to Liverpool, Liverpool, 3-1 losses to Manchester City and Wolves, a 3-0 loss to Leicester, a 2-0 loss in the EFL Cup to their biggest op Spurs, 3-1 loss to United in the FA Cup where Lingard moonwalked at the Emirates, and a 4-1 loss to Chelsea in the final of Emery's bread and butter competition, the Europa League. Add to this a 5th place finish, which meant that Arsenal were still not going to be in the Champions League, and growing tensions from fans that were displayed on AFTV week in and week out.
Every fan that travelled should get refunded. Flight, hotel, ticket, everything. That is fucking embarrassing, Robbie Blood.
It became clear that Arsenal were a long way from returning to glory still. In Emery's following season, he would only end up managing Arsenal for a handful of months, as he would be sacked on November 29th, 2019 after an abysmal campaign up to that point. If you thought the results I just listed were bad, brother, wait till you hear this. A 3-1 loss to Liverpool, a 2-2 draw in the North London derby, followed by a 2-2 draw to last place Watford where they blew a 2-goal lead, a 1-0 loss to Sheffield, a 2-0 loss to Leicester, another 2-2 draw to once again 19th place Southampton were all a part of Emery's terrible start that led to him getting fired, leaving behind a poor Arsenal team that was sitting in 8th place. Once Emery was gone, rumors began to fly regarding Arsenal's managerial position, with names like Conte being thrown around and Freddie Ljungberg temporarily taking over as manager. Arsenal had to move quickly in order to ensure that their season didn't take a freefall. On December 22nd, 2019, Arteta would begin his tenure as an Arsenal manager. Arteta's appointment would be a divisive one amongst Arsenal fans, as not everyone was convinced that he would be the one to bring them back to glory.
I think if we're going to be honest, I think most fans would have been a little bit underwhelmed by that appointment.
Despite his potential, there was still going to be a tall task ahead of him due to the state of the Arsenal side, and an overall lack of actual first team managerial experience did have some fans questioning the appointment. And one could say that the naysayers were right to an extent. Arteta was able to steer Arsenal to an 8th place finish, which negatively impacted his reputation on paper. Here you had this manager who was supposed to be the second coming of Pep Guardiola, but yet he finished nowhere near top 4. Add to this an embarrassing Europa League exit to Olympiacos, a loss to 15th place Brighton, which spawned this amazing AFTV clip.
I say Black Lives Matter. I say thank you to NHS. Mopa, you are an absolute disgrace. You're a cheat. I hope Brighton get relegated.
A loss to 19th place Aston Villa, and a 2-1 North London derby loss amongst many other odd results, and it looked like the Banter era was still going strong. However, if you paid attention, it was clear that there were some signs of an eventual turnaround. For example, in 2 of Arteta's games, this Arsenal side managed to win 4-0. He also managed to guide this Arsenal team to a FA Cup victory, meaning that in just a couple of months at the helm, he would prove to the world that his vision was capable of resulting in silverware. However, despite this, the collective opinion on Arteta and Arsenal was that the Banter era lived on for now. The following 2020-2021 season would be Arteta's first full season in charge, which meant that now more than ever, he had to show what he was capable of. He would use the summer transfer windows to get rid of players who did not fit his vision from a tactical and personnel standpoint and bring in those who did. Major departures included Guendouzi, Torreira, Mkhitaryan, Mavropanos, and Emi Martinez. With a better imprint on the squad, Arteta was ready to take the season by storm. And honestly, what transpired next makes it even more shocking that Arteta is still the Arsenal manager. By match day 15, Arsenal found themselves in 15th place.
Easy top 3. If I'm not 16th!
The Banter era was well and truly alive. Up to this point, Arsenal fans were already demanding Arteta out. AFTV was well and truly in a golden era here.
This man, for me, this job is too big for him, bro.
With results like a 2-0 loss in the North London derby, a 2-1 defeat to Everton, a 1-0 loss to 18th place Burnley, a 4-1 loss to City in the EFL Cup, Arteta looked entirely out of his depth. As Arsenal sat in 15th place, it seemed like there would be no escaping the Banter era at this point. From here on out, Arteta was essentially fighting for his job with every single game that came his way. Unfortunately for hate watchers like myself, Arteta would not relegate Arsenal, but they managed to somewhat rescue their season with an 8th place finish. With 2 back-to-back 8th place finishes, confidence in Arteta felt like it was at an all-time low, not only from the fans of the club, but also from rivals. But despite everything I just listed off, Arteta kept his job going into the 21-22 season. That summer window would be crucial to Arteta's success, as this was his chance to bring in reinforcements that were clearly desperately needed. Notable players that would prove to change Arsenal's trajectory would be Ben White, Tomiyasu, and Aaron Ramsdale. With the squad taking more and more shape to what Arteta was looking for, he was ready to take this season by storm. So you may be asking yourself, how did Arsenal start the season? He started it with a 2-0 loss to Brentford, a 2-0 loss to Chelsea, and a 5-0 loss to Man City, meaning that by the third game week, Arsenal found themselves 20th, last place in the Premier League. Oh brother, how did Arteta manage to keep his job? This easily could have been it for him. Pack your bags, go take a vacation to Spain, thank you for the memories, but it's time to go. And yet Arsenal decided to keep him around for the season. The decision to keep him after all this proved to be a major turning point for Arsenal and Arteta. Despite ending this season in disappointing fashion by bottling top 4 after losses to Southampton, Brighton, and Palace, by the end of the season, the vibes at Arsenal were at the highest they have been in a while. Even though the vision on the pitch was taking a while to fully materialize, Arteta was making changes behind the scenes that would be massive and shaking things up at the club. Additionally, this was all captured in the All or Nothing documentary that followed Arsenal this season. For those that watched that, you got a clear look into Arteta and his relationship with the players and the changes that he was making. From little things like moving the office closer to his other members of the staff, to showing up even earlier before training, Arteta was implementing a disciplined and family-oriented culture at Arsenal. For too long, the environment at Arsenal was an extremely toxic one, and Arteta was ready to put an end to all of that. This season also saw the departure of Aubameyang in the winter and Lacazette in the summer after the season was over. Aubameyang's transfer was extremely notable as it felt like an exclamation point in the statement that Arteta was trying to make with Arsenal. No more tardiness, no more egos clouding the dressing room. Rather, each and every player who was going to step foot on that pitch for Arsenal was going to give it their all, not just for themselves, but for their teammates and the fans. Add to this the changes that were happening behind the scenes at Arsenal over the last couple of years, and at least among Arsenal supporters, there was a more clear upward trajectory for Arsenal and Arteta. However, for the general footballing world, Arteta's future was still in the air. Having taken over for Unai Emery, who some argued had done a better job at Arsenal in his short time there, Arteta had guided this Arsenal to an 8th place finish twice and now a 5th place finish. With that symbolic start to the season, a FA Cup exit to Forest, bottling a top 4 finish, and a few more embarrassing losses scattered throughout the season, at that point in time, it still felt that Arsenal's banter era was well and truly alive. Boy, how quickly the things changed. The transfer window before the 22-23 season shocked many people as it saw Arsenal sign Gabriel Jesus and Zinchenko from Man City. Arteta, who already had a very similar style to Pep Guardiola, was now nabbing 2 of their players who, despite their inconsistent playing time, were still key pieces to City's success. This was well and truly the season where everything changed for Arsenal as Arteta's vision was finally being translated on the pitch. Aggressive pressing, beautiful build-up play, the utilization of wing play with the likes of Saka and Martinelli, Arsenal was finally finding success that they had not seen for such a long time. All those embarrassing results, all the pressure from fans, the headlines of drama, everything was worth it for Arteta up to this point in time, as he would go on and mount a serious title charge. This was where, to the footballing world's surprise, Arsenal's banter era was over. Arteta was without a doubt the mastermind behind this transformation. Game after game, he stuck to his ideology, created the culture he saw fit as a former Arsenal captain, and put his faith into players that he saw were capable of playing the football that he visualized. Unfortunately for Arsenal and Arteta this season, it seemed like the lack of experience, especially when going toe-to-toe with Man City, caught up to them in the end. In the final 8 weeks of the season, they would drop massive points to Liverpool, West Ham, Southampton, and eventual champions Man City. After 248 days at the top, Arsenal would ultimately finish in 2nd place. This was honestly the last thing that we were truly able to banter Arsenal about. The fact that they spent so much time at the top after so many poor seasons and they still ended up bottling it was enough fuel for all the hate watchers, all the rival fans to still give Arsenal some stick. It did help, at least for those who still believe the banter era had some little bit of traction left to it, but Arsenal fans really thought they were going to win the league, so it made it really easy to still relentlessly clown them even though they just had a great season. This would be really the last time that we could banter Arsenal to the extent that we would from the end of Wenger's era to the 21-22 season, because this season they're proving that their title charge was not a fluke. After acquiring Declan Rice to further strengthen their team, Arsenal are once again in a title race. At the point of recording this, they sit at the top of the league alongside Liverpool, only beating them out on goal difference at the moment. We have to wait and see how the rest of the season pans out for Arsenal, but unfortunately for the hate watchers like myself, their banter era is honestly over. Unless something drastic happens that changes the trajectory of this Arsenal team, I don't see the banter era really returning full strength like it was before for quite some time. With Klopp leaving after this season and Pep Guardiola being capable of leaving City at pretty much any point unannounced, this could be the beginning of a period for Arsenal under Arteta where they cash in on the loyalty that they showed that man. But hey, let's hope this isn't a curse.